But right now, what I'm going to do is ask Chris Cummings, my co-host, to come and join me on the stage. And then we'll get into our opening keynote. So, hey, Chris, good to see you. What was your form score today?
I'm a 7 today, Rob. So the sun is shining. I'm feeling good and excited about the event ahead. So yeah, really good.
Fantastic. So good to see you. So I'll get out of the way now, Chris, and I know you can introduce our keynote. So over to you.
Yeah, thanks very much, Rob. And hello, everyone, and welcome to the G24 NHS Summit. There's obviously been a seismic shift in everyone's lives this year. And we're, by all means, we're not through this pandemic yet. But what I've seen is some real positives over recent months, especially with all of you, the incredible work that you do in the NHS day in, day out. And we've all been touched by the NHS. I've got 2 family members who work in the NHS, so I've seen it firsthand. And I just wanted to say, before we begin, thank you to everyone who's joined us today. Thank you for all of the work that you've done, and I hope the content that you hear today goes some way in helping your mental health and recovery from these extraordinary times. So let's get started. It gives me great pleasure to welcome onto the stage Sir Norman Lamb. Sir Norman, as you all know, has been a tireless campaigner for mental health, both as an MP in North Norfolk between 2001 and 2019, and in government as a Minister for Business and Minister of State in the Department of Health. He's recently established a mental health and wellbeing fund in Norfolk and is chair of the South London and Maudsley NHS Foundation Trust and chair of the Children's and Young People's Mental Health Coalition. So if I could ask Norman to turn on his camera and come and join us on the stage, that would be fantastic.
Just inviting Norman up to the stage. Chris will be with us in a second. There we go. Hi, Norman.
Hello, and thank you very much indeed, Chris, for that introduction. And it's very good to be here. And Chris, I wanted to also start by offering my sincere thanks to workers within the NHS for the commitment they've shown through this extraordinary period of the last few months. I've witnessed it myself as chair of the South London and Maudsley, staff showing extraordinary resilience, staff showing a commitment and a professionalism that has been outstanding in my view. And what I'm acutely aware of is that each one of us copes with stress and anxiety and pressure in different ways. But for many people working within the NHS, particularly those in groups who are more at risk, whether it's because of underlying health conditions or because they are from an ethnic group where the fatality rate has been higher than the general population, the level of anxiety for many people will have been acute through this. And I think we have to recognize that and acknowledge it and express our sincere appreciation to those who've fought their way through this on behalf of all of us. That's the key thing. It's immensely impressive. Chris mentioned my sort of interest and commitment to mental health. Just a word briefly about why that is. So my family, our family has been touched by mental ill health, along with probably everyone who's listening in today. Our oldest son diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder as a teenager. And, you know, I often say that we went through years of emotional turmoil. But also I have my oldest sister, Catherine, took her own life following the death of our mother. So our family has been impacted by mental ill health, not in the same way as some have, but I think it's given me a degree of understanding and a degree of empathy with those who've experienced mental ill health. But it's also given me a sense of recognizing the injustice that persists today, that those people who experience mental ill health still don't get the same access to treatment as others enjoy. In our own family's case, I remember the moment when we were told we would have to wait 6 months for any help to come our way when we were in a moment of crisis with our son. We were desperate for help. We couldn't wait 6 months, so we did what I guess any family would do. We paid for treatment if you're able to. For most families, that's not an option. And I think that that amounts to an unacceptable injustice, which needs to be corrected. We need to ensure that regardless of your ability to pay, you get access to support when you need it, which means that we have to do quite a lot, I think, to reform the way our mental health system works, spending less money on containing people in long stay in hospital and spending more money on early intervention, on prevention, and on supporting people through crisis and to recovery. Which brings me on to the COVID crisis, because whilst as a country and as a globe, we've been focused on the physical health crisis, what we all recognize now, I think, is that there is a psychological dimension to this, and indeed a likely psychological fallout from the physical health crisis. So I've mentioned already what many staff within the NHS have gone through, and many have expressed a sense of being emotionally exhausted as a result of this. Some, probably many, will have experienced trauma in a very real sense through this crisis. And for some people who experience trauma, there is a clear correlation with the experience of trauma and an increased likelihood of consequences, mental health consequences subsequently. And that, of course, includes post-traumatic stress. So we have to, it seems to me, start planning now for the likely psychological fallout from this crisis. If you go beyond the people working in the NHS, those heroes who have supported us through this period, there is also a significant community aspect to this. If you think about the risk factors that are out there, the fear of unemployment, the reality of unemployment, fear of a build-up of debt, financial anxiety, we know is linked to an increased risk of mental ill health. Then there is the fact that so many families will have experienced bereavement through this period. And then there is the shocking reality, which we have witnessed, that there has been an increase in domestic violence during this period. And then there is also the concern that for many children, school is normally a sanctuary. It's somewhere safe for children to go. And it's often where the telltale signs of abuse and neglect are picked up and referrals are made to the necessary authorities, particularly the police. But I organised a summit for Norfolk community-based organisations working in mental health a couple of weeks ago. And we got the Chief Constable along, who happens to be the national lead on child sexual abuse. And he was saying that there's been a reduction in reporting of sexual abuse during this period, but that's because they normally get the referrals from schools. And of course, with children not attending school, we really have no idea what's going on behind those locked front doors. And for some children, they will have experienced trauma, abuse, neglect, and there will be consequences of that coming down the line. So I have argued, together with others, particularly Warren Larkin, a leading psychologist who focuses on trauma-informed care. I've argued, and we've written to the Secretary of State for Health, along with about 65 organisations, calling for the government to establish what we're calling a resilience task force, to start the planning now for what we know is coming down the track, so that we prepare in a proper and effective way a sort of public mental health response to the psychological fallout that is likely to happen as a result of this COVID crisis. If I can then turn to what we're doing at the South London and Maudsley. First of all, so far as the wider population is concerned, taking into account, my view that we are facing a likely fallout, psychological fallout from this crisis, I propose that we should organise a prevention summit locally. We did it jointly with local authorities. We invited community-based organisations, faith groups, third sector organisations, people with lived experience. And we had the most remarkable response to that. We had over 1,000 people registering to take part in that virtual summit. And that summit, which took place about a month ago, has now initiated a programme of a year's work, recognising that we can only confront this effectively if we do it through collaboration. The NHS can't do it on its own. We have to collaborate with local authorities, with community and faith groups, with third sector organisations, and with people in our communities. We need to track the levels of distress in society. So just as one example, tracking non-payment of council tax is worth doing because it gives us an understanding of likely levels of distress in society. When a family stops paying council tax, it's an indication that they may well be falling into distress. And so rather than just standing back and sending the threatening letter demanding payment, perhaps as an effective public mental health response, we should be identifying those families and responding to them quickly to find out the situation they're in, to give them support on debt advice, and to help them through the practical challenge of perhaps unemployment or the failure of a business or whatever it might be. And I think in that way, being creative, being collaborative, we can come up with a much more effective response than we would otherwise do. And then finally, and I'm conscious that I mustn't overstay my welcome, we've also spent a lot of time focusing on the needs of staff. Interestingly, we put in place a number of different steps, along with, I think, most other mental health and other NHS trusts, such as a 24/7 helpline for staff and for patients, but also ensuring that there were rest and recharge hubs available for staff to give them a break from the pressure that they are under. We got loads of donations of amazing stuff to support staff through this period. But we're also now involved in a research project to check what mechanisms to support staff were the most effective so far as the staff themselves are concerned. Because it seems to me we must learn the lessons now of what worked and what didn't, in case there is a risk of a second spike this winter. And simply understanding better how we can support our staff through difficult times. So we've taken that action. I also chair an advisory board for a digital mental health company called ZenZone. They have an adult platform called Quell. They made it available by way of example to the West Midlands Ambulance Trust. Many paramedics have gone through incredibly challenging times over these last few months. And so they have it now available to all of their staff. And through that, they can access online information, guidance, support. They can go into chat rooms to talk to others about what they're experiencing, all moderated so that it's safe. And they can get access to one-to-one counselling online. So these sorts of ways in which we can support NHS staff more effectively, I think all have to be explored so that we learn the lessons now and improve the way in which we can support staff in the future. So thank you very much for having me. Thank you again for everything that you've done through this extraordinarily testing time. It is massively appreciated by so many of us. Thank you.
Norman, thank you very much. And I also appreciate you sharing your elements of your personal story that has driven you to be a long-standing campaigner to make the world a better place from a mental health point of view. So I'd like to offer my thanks for all you do and you continue to do on that score as well. So, and again, thank you for joining us at this very busy time.